Welcome to another episode of the Being Human and Doing Psychotherapy podcast, where I'm aiming to parse out what's the human part of behind the role of psychotherapists and what is the therapeutic part that we have in all of us and how we can harness it and nurture it. And today, and I never say this, but I actually need to introduce myself. I'm Alex. I'm the host of this podcast, and I'm also a therapist and a scientist. And I work mostly with overachieving individuals from all walks of life. But today, I'm really happy to be joined by Pauline Peck. And there are plenty of reasons why I have her here. One of those is the wittiness which she approaches really complicated and difficult topics. The other one is the human aspect that I really connect to and that you will hear through the poem that she will read as we start the interview. And the last one is just the genuine approach and curiosity that I think that's how I perceive her to be in this therapy space. So really welcome, Pauline, and I'm really curious to see what discussion it will bring.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. And as a recovering overachiever myself, I feel like I'm in a good space to talk about this today.
So shall we then start with what we agreed on, which is I will just introduce why we're doing this. So this is a poem that Pauline wrote and that really deeply touched me. And I think that's where we recognized each other. And I really felt that that's where the human part of her came through. And I think we really need to cultivate spaces for the human parts of psychotherapists. So that's why this poem is here.
I appreciate that. And the reason that I shared this poem on social media, which is really kind of the first of its kind, I have written small poems like this and pieces like this, but the reason I wanted to intentionally share it on my page is it's so important for us to not just share what we think and our ideas, but to share what we feel and how we exist in the world. And so many times I think we think it's the thought, the opinion, this aha insight that is going to create change, where really in psychotherapy or in life, sometimes what creates change is just being who we are. And so my goal has been to continuously encourage myself to be who I am in a genuine way, and a platform that doesn't always feel that it honors the genuineness. There is that element of it, but for me to be able to use the platform as a tool and to lean into this. So I wrote this poem for myself on a day where I was feeling, as the young generation says, I was in my feels. I was in my feels, feeling all the feelings, and I wrote it. And then I thought, what would it be like to share this? I've already written it for myself. I didn't write it for a performance. I wrote it for myself, but what would it be like to share? This is what I do sometimes with these big feelings, is to write them. And then even when I'm just by myself, I often print them out and then read them aloud. So like I do that, and I've done that kind of always. I've never publicly said this, but I've always done that. I used to write songs as a kid, write poems as a kid, and then I would just kind of have like a little performance on my own. So here is me sharing that with you. The poem is called My Big Feelings. My big feelings are evidence of my big heart. And even though I'm grown, I'm still growing into knowing it. Grief and rage and sadness shine like a flashlight, leading me to explore the crevices of this thing that both beats and breaks, both nourishes me with warmth and reduces me to tears. This thing that connects me to all things, even though I wish it wouldn't. I've tried to make it smaller, see less, feel less, give less, be less, hope less. I return again. It's pointless to swim against the current, thinking you can stop the ocean. Lately, I've been experimenting with surfing, surrendering to the ebbs and flows of this heart and figuring out how to move with rather than against. I've gotten quiet to listen and understand the language of this heartbreak, the language my ancestors knew well, For in this language is the secret to a life where connection to self is a buoy, where connection to others is the sun, and connection to all living things is the sky. If I must live with the heart, I want to live like this. For me, for them, for us all, where courage is matched with connection, where being called a bleeding heart is a compliment, not an insult. And living like this means salt in your wounds sometimes, yes, but I'd much rather live at the beach than holed up at home, too afraid to feel. When you touch those tender edges of your big, big heart, touch with the gentle fingertips of the many who have come before you. Hear them whisper with words of encouragement. Your big feelings are evidence of your big heart.
I will just take a moment for letting that sink in, and I'm noticing my voice changed. I feel like more present, and the last sentence you said, I just felt a rush of electricity going through my whole body. So I kind of want to continue this interview, but I also feel like it can just stop here.
Yeah.
And I want to just hear, how are you after reading this?
You described what I felt too. I just feel that when I'm moving in that space, there's something that feels so spiritual. I feel so deeply connected to myself and also other, whether that other is directly you or whether that other is someone who might be listening. Like it just stepping into that human need we have to be fully seen and to be fully experienced. And there's something about that that makes me feel really alive. And no matter how many times I'm reading it, there's something also about when you're entering into a space where there's art and there's true sharing of heart, which is really what art is about. It's like sharing your art and sharing your heart in some artistic form. I feel like in some ways the regular practical everyday just stops. It's like, oh, something is happening now. Like there's a sacredness to it and a feeling like a specialness. Is like something about that moment changes. And so I feel that change. Like it's almost like a different way of being and flowing. And then afterwards, I feel that buzzing. I feel the tingling. It feels kind of shaky, a little bit like I'm coming out of it. And then I'm like, oh shit, like everybody saw me in this really real space. I feel really seen. And then there's like an element sometimes of like, oh, I'm exposed. It's a lot. It's raw, but it's also like good because you know that you went there and maybe somebody could feel that with you there. And so it's all of those pieces afterwards. My voice kind of changes throughout and the feelings as well. Like I could just feel that rhythmic kind of pulsing and electricity within me as well whenever I share something that feels really from the depths
Yeah.
of my own heart and my own experience.
Yeah, and as you were saying this, there is an element of timelessness.
Mm.
As I was listening to you, it's almost like after within these words, there I feel like I am in that ocean of of timelessness of emotion. And one thing that I really appreciated before you started reading the poem, but also one sentence in your poem, which is, although I'm grown, I'm still growing into knowing it. And I think that's really the part of me and the part of psychotherapy that I appreciate, that is the most difficult to kind of bring out in the public, which is what you've said before you started reading, which is that a lot of therapy is about being with rather than understanding and knowing, because oftentimes we know but not really know with our bodies. And I'm maybe the question would be, what was, in your experience, what was really difficult to truly know?
Oh goodness. Um, I mean, I'm almost like thinking about a number of different ways to answer that because I think there's a part of me that wants to back up all the way historically, almost zoom out to say so many BIPOC individuals, non-white, colonized, oppressed peoples disconnect from the intuitive ways of knowing
Yeah.
in order to survive. babies when they are born and born within safe circumstances where they can have available caregivers, they know what they know. They're not self-conscious that they don't have the theory. They know when they're hungry. They know when they're excited about something. They look at things as long as they want, as long as they're curious about them with no judgment that they don't understand. It's like they're so okay listening to the signs and signals of their bodies and trusting that and then going forward with that. And where I think a lot of us get mixed up and those signals become dampened is through that survival process when we don't have the tools in our environment, and collectively as people we have to disconnect in order to survive in this very mental way that disconnects us from our inherent knowing. And I think that I often didn't lean into the experience of untangling this way of knowing from my body until I was in crisis.
Yeah.
Because you can ignore your body
For
until those
such a
signs
long
and
time.
signals. Yeah. But when it comes to a head and you can no longer ignore because there is a crisis and your body is now in a state of crisis, something is happening. I see it all the time when people come in. I can no longer concentrate or I can no longer do my job. Usually it's this like external thing that they're used to being able to do and function that they're not able to do. And then that crisis is the first time that they unwillingly look inward to be able to fix whatever they feel is the problem. And of course, you can move through therapy that way, doing the symptom reduction. What's the symptom? Sleeplessness, lack of concentration. Okay, let's fix that. And then we do that, and the person goes on. My goal always, regardless of what the person is coming in for, is for them to have a greater capacity for knowing at that deep level, which really in some ways just means going back to their inherent natural state. That's the most natural state that we have. Again, knowing what you know in your body and using your body alongside. It's not I'm no longer going to have rationality. That's part of maturing from a baby who doesn't know things about the world to a human that might know some things about the world. This is an added option. And my goal is always to bring that body in again as not just a natural, but an ancestral tool that has been used for millennia as a way of knowing and navigating the world. If not, we would not have body sensations. If not, we would not have emotions. They are purposeful, adaptive, and functional. So my knowing came from my places of deepest heartbreak. And in listening to the heartbreak, I was like, oh shit, my body actually has a lot of wisdom for me, but I'm too disconnected to listen. And then now the reservoir is full and I have to listen to like all of this is like not cleaning the dishes. And then all of a sudden you're standing at the, sink for what feels like an hour because it's all piled up. But when you do that, you're like, oh, there's a method to this. My body is telling me things. I know things. When did I not listen to my knowing? Oh, that was the result. And now I'm this place, but I did know that. How do I go back to that trust? So I've always kind of leaned into those moments, sometimes unwillingly, but found my buy-in from the places of my biggest heartbreak. So literal heartbreak, so breakups with romantic partners, pain points with friendships, times in my life where something didn't go as I wanted, times where I failed. And I don't mean that in like a self-judgmental. I mean like I made the mistake or I didn't get the expected result. I mean, I think failing can have such a negative connotation. Now we always want to be compassionate, like, oh, I learned, but like sometimes it's okay to say I failed, or death or loss or big transitions. These were moments that were both the crisis and the opportunity. And I think as I could learn from the opportunity piece of it, I felt more confident in being able to trust that knowing. And then slowly, slowly, slowly having that knowing happen way before all of the byproducts of not listening to the knowing had happened. And so I just got like one step ahead of it, one step ahead of it, one step ahead of it. And it was like 40-year process. So I'm hoping that people know it's not like an overnight thing, but I still bypass my knowing sometimes. I still know something, but my head takes over. I intellectualize it. I think, oh no, this will be fine. And then I have to kind of have that extra awareness of like, no, but deep down, this isn't right for you, or this isn't. And I've gotten better at getting ahead, but sometimes the old ways, the old patterns kind of check in. So I guess I want to also normalize that there's no final, okay, once you know, it will be done, and you'll always end up listening to your intuition, to your value system. It's a continuous choice point
Mm.
and a continuous learning, which is, even though I'm grown, I'm still growing into knowing it. That line will probably be applicable for the rest of my life.
And I'm sitting with, as you're saying, that it's often the process of therapy. I think that's a little bit misrepresented, but sometimes it's also about building a voice that's holding you in the space when you have failed, quote unquote, or bypassed yourself, and not being like, oh, why have I done this to myself again? Or you're like, I'm like, whatever ugly voice you have that kind of butchers you for all your mistakes. Part of therapy is I think, in addition to being able to listen pre things coming to overwhelm, is also building that voice, which when things do not go as you planned it, how do you speak to yourself? Because that's another part. And you speak a lot about um, ancestors and what you've got from them, and I feel, coming from Serbia and having a lot of the cultural traditions to move through grief, through song and collective being together. Um, I feel like that's something that's missing. So I'm wondering, how was it for you growing up in a different country? Was that still somewhat present? And I actually don't remember, are you a first or second generation immigrant and things like that? So maybe say something more about your story, because people who are listening to this may not know where you're from and what your history is.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing in the specifics and even the grief rituals. I mean, I'll talk specifically about that too, because it's a part of my story. I was born in Iran. Culturally and ethnically, I'm Armenian, but Armenians are diasporic people, and being an Iranian Armenian means something very specific to me, because there's so much of Iranian culture that influences how I experience myself, and the cultural familiarity that I have and my cultural roadmap. So moved to the US. So just to give you a cultural context of what was happening in the country, I was born in 84. So in 79, there was the big revolution, and the country was in a area in a season of instability, and then entered into an 8-year long war with Iraq. And so, right kind of in the middle of that war, as a religious minority, the Christian population, and my parents were very much involved in the Christian movement. My grandfather, my dad's dad, actually started kind of a Christian movement in Iran, and is seen as like a grandfather of that movement. And so my parents, it was no longer really safe, and it forced this migration to the United States. And we had a choice point between England, UK, where my dad's side of the family was, or my mom's side of the family, who was in Los Angeles. So my mom was about 6 months pregnant with my sister, and we moved to Los Angeles, where her family was. And within a week or two of being in America, I turned 4. And so I have zero memories of Iran. I don't have a single memory of living in Iran, even though I've seen pictures and I have heard a lot of stories. I don't have a firsthand
And the
account.
language?
I did speak, so I was told that. So my first language was Armenian. My second language was Persian. Some call it Farsi. And then when I moved to America, the Farsi kind of went away and the English came on. So English was my third language, but I think in English because I was educated in English. But I was told that I spoke Farsi, what they call like a bulbul, and bulbul is a nightingale, and it also is like lovingly used to describe a toddler who speaks very fast. And so my lifelong thing of trying to slow down my speaking, because I think fast and I talk fast. So apparently I spoke Farsi like a bulbul. When you hear, I mean, fun little neuroscience facts, but when you hear the phenoms of a phonemes. I always say that word wrong. The phonemes of a language within the first 9 months. So we as humans can babble in every single language, but during that first period of time, if you don't hear certain sounds, your brain literally prunes them. That's why if I were trying to learn Chinese right now, it would be hard actually for me to physically move my mouth and my palate according to that. And the same thing when I try to teach my Italian American husband, like r or like g, and he's like ka, and I'm like, no, it's not ka, it's a r, and he's like, I can't do a r, I can't do that, it's like he didn't hear those sounds. So all that to say that my dad here in America, my parents were pastors, and they pastored an Iranian church where there were Armenians, there were Assyrians, and there were a lot of converts from Judaism or Islam, and the meetings were in Persian with English translation. So I did, as a teenager, kind of bring it back, and my brain had that reservoir for it already from my first 9 months, even though I probably now speak way, way less fluently than I did when I was 2 years old, and I don't even remember, which is kind of wild sometimes to think about. So I come to America, and we've got this kind of multicultural experience of me, especially being the lightest person in my family, the most white passing, the fastest in terms of acculturation. I had an older brother, but he was more shy and introverted. I was a lot more social, which means if you're not afraid of going up to someone without knowing the language, you kind of gonna learn it faster. Yeah. So I feel like I entered into American / kind of white culture in a very different way than maybe the skin color or the personality types allowed for my older brother or my younger sister, who was then born in America. So here we were as Armenians, but mostly within an Iranian kind of multi-ethnic community, because that was my parents' church community. And then I was having this other experience at school and being able to make a lot of friends, especially as I, grew up without having an accent and really got to learn, okay, how can I morph and become a social chameleon in order to be able to be accepted? And being accepted as an immigrant means to, what now I know is, be as white as possible, be as normal. And normal is always based on the context of the place that you're being and not being different from the norms of that. So very Western, very American norms. And I felt like the closer I could get to that, the more accepted I was going to be. And so I really experienced myself, mostly as someone that had these multiple settings with very different rules. Like church had its own rules because of piety and certain morality and certain kind of way that you do church, things that you never even, say like stupid or shut up at church. But then at school, maybe you use other language, other ways of being. As a teenager, I would like hide clothing that I was not going to be let to be out of the house with it, like short skirts. I would hide that in my backpack and then change once I got to school. So even literally dressing differently based on, okay, this is going to be okay in my home. This is going to be maybe another version of it in this public church setting where I was the pastor's kid, which carries its own things. Yeah. And then here was me navigating the world as somebody who was getting access to that majority culture. I was getting those doors opened and getting to have experiences where I felt like, oh, they don't feel like I'm an outsider. I'm getting inside access to this because I don't seem like I'm different. Funny side story is that when my mom died, in her closet was this little piece of the ceiling that if you moved it, like things were hidden in it. All of my short skirts, my crop tops, all of the clothing, because my mom did my laundry. So I would buy, and this is going to be like, Abercrombie still exists, but like I would like squirrel away money, buy a super short jean skirt from Abercrombie with like the frayed thing. Now it's literally in style again, which is kind of wild to say. Wear it once and then it would disappear. Well, it was in my mom's little hidden compartment where she hid the clothes that she didn't want me wearing. So this is what I mean by different rules at home, different rules at school, different setup. And so I didn't realize this was happening, which was kind of a universal experience for childhood. You don't know that your childhood is your unique childhood. It's just your life until you become an adult and you start looking back. Or most importantly, when I went to college and got exposed to a lot of difference, when I started to get exposed to difference and see the world beyond the world I had, and we traveled, and I'd go abroad to England, see my dad's side of the family almost every other summer. So it wasn't like I hadn't seen the world, but really to be kind of plucked out of my family, not be living at home, see myself as an adult, and then be like, what kind of adult am I? And what kind of experiences have I had? That was the beginning of my, which we now know kind of happens in racial identity development, of thinking myself as, oh, well, I'm white passing, but I'm not white. And how did the ethnic piece, and how did I morph? And that was really the beginning of understanding this multicultural, bicultural experience, and how it had shaped what I now do, which is my mental health in particular, but just shaped me, shaped my choices, shaped my way of experiencing and moving through the world.
And what I'm sitting as I'm listening to you, there is a piece. I mean, this is maybe me projecting something about my experience, but I'm wondering how much guilt had to carry transitioning from one identity to the other, and constantly feeling like you're hiding something, and almost being an imposter wherever you go. And I'm wondering if that was your experience in transitioning from these places, and how difficult was then to kind of bridge them back together, not feeling like they need to be disparate.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I don't know if they're all integrated fully. Like, I just recently had a birthday, and that same like old anxiety I have felt before, where you're going to have a birthday party, and if you invite everyone that's your friend, you're going to be inviting people from those different groups that have
yeah.
different codes, which have different yous and different versions of you. And I was just like, no birthday party, I'm okay. And it's not like I'm that different. Like, a lot of people that follow me on social media and then talk to me are like, oh, you're kind of exactly how I thought you would be. I don't think I have a lot of imposter or projecting and having like a lot of dissonance between my public self and my private self. But still, I had that old birthday party anxiety of all these different parts coming together. And I had to look into that and be like, do I really have anxiety? I think I was just tired and didn't want to plan a party. But I'm not at total integration, whatever that would feel like and the experience would be like. But one interesting thing about me, it's very common for people to feel that guilt. What I didn't feel as much of the guilt, or maybe I did feel the guilt, but when there's a difficult feeling, or a feeling that feels kind of helpless, I am really good, and this has been a coping skill of mine for a very long time. I'm really good at turning it into something that I am going to have some agency and control over. Like, I like having that level of power. And so I would feel guilty sometimes, like, oh, like, I'm doing this, and then my parents are hurting, and oh, if they only knew, like, I had that. But then I turn it into, but like, look how good you're at this. You can switch, and you're good at this, like a point of pride
Yeah.
over my ability to make these various moves and be a social chameleon. And so I feel like I somehow sublimated some of my feelings of guilt, which we feel bad. Just let's like make it bad or good, to a feeling of power, a feeling of agency, a feeling like I can move in all of these different ways. And it almost felt like, oh, I'm getting to like trick the system. And it felt good, and sometimes, to be like a cultural spy. Like, I remember a very
I
particular time,
love your
right?
reframing of that. That's
Yeah, it's like,
amazing.
oh, I'm like a cultural spy and people don't know, and I'm so good at this. Like, I felt like I somehow owned that, even though looking back, part of my work has been to like let that strong part be, just sit for a second, so that the soft part that was like, this felt really shitty at times. And I didn't, know what to do with holding the fact that I am doing this normal exploration, but it's painful for my parents and they don't know, but it's hurting them. Or those moments where it would clash, and then my parents would see something, and the heartbreak. And it was like, that felt really hard. And part of my healing has been allowing the softness of that guilt to be experienced now, because I can experience it. I don't have to be in kind of the strong driver's seat mode that I think I survived childhood by being. It was like I owned the choice and doubled down on it and framed it into something that like I liked, in order to get through it. So that was kind of my interesting way. It was like I wasn't going to be, and I had an uncle once say this. He's like, your brother and sister, they've got a threshold and then they'll break. But you're interesting because you'll just keep going and you'll bend. You're a bender, not a breaker. And he's like, it's your gift and it's your like kind of Achilles heel and a challenge for you. And I feel like the bending was me. Oh yeah, I chose that. I wanted that. And looking
Yes.
back and being like, I chose within a realm of limited choices. That's the reality of what happened. And being with the softness of the grief that comes, the pain that comes from that, and being able to sit with that has been my healing. So I almost feel like I didn't experience it too long as the guilt piece or I'm doing something wrong piece. It quickly turned to, oh, I would choose this. I'd be empowered in this. This is mine. And then the healing has come to actually go back to what the original feeling was, and then to look at the context that created the very circumstances that kind of contributed to that original feeling. So it's been kind of a windy path. And I think that's why personality and temperament also really factor into some of this, because I think that other women's journeys have been so different according to their personalities as well. I kind of took it as like a badge of honor. And then later it's like, oh no, that was a real pain point, and I'm safe
Yeah.
enough now to be able, I'm resourced and supported enough now to be able to feel the original pain of it.
Yeah, and I'm sitting with, I remember when I was speaking to my therapist, how I was so proud. Was holding so so much pride about how many languages I'm able to speak, and how I can morph easily into just about any environment. And then now I'm kind of looking at what's the other polarity. Actually, how do I differentiate and really choose the environments I want to be part of based on what is truly my value, and choicefully, rather than having to do something in order to survive. So it's I feel like I'm bendy as well. And I also know the pain of understanding what it means to bend everywhere.
Yeah. And I think the grief work that's inherent is
Yeah,
that is so big that sometimes it can feel like too
absolutely.
much to take in. And
Mm,
wherever there is grief, you also, you're grieving like a giant black hole and it's not yet full.
yeah.
So it's like you're standing at the precipice of all these things that could have been, might have been, but aren't. And it's really painful to grieve it, and then to know that slowly you have to fill it. And one counterpart I see to this is like, if I grieve that I've had to be a social chameleon and adapt so much in order to survive, and I just look at that, then I also am looking at this whole of not having been given the tools or the space or the support to figure out who I am. So I'm kind of looking at what I have found in every immigrant, child of immigrant that I've worked with, some level of emptiness, some level of not knowing what your authentic and who your authentic self is. And it's painful because I think maybe we're doing this work later in our lives. You're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and it can be strange to acknowledge that you're chronologically 45, but you don't really know what you like to do the way that an 8-year-old maybe doesn't really even quite yet fully know what they like to do. So I always talk about chronological age and then emotional age. So emotionally, you might be that 8-year-old that needs to just be given a bunch of options and to start at, okay, let me just try a few things to see what I might like. Like you've got to go way back to a child version of you. And that's how you begin to fill that black hole. It's like first you have to brace yourself for looking at it because you're like, oh, I've been so much, but what's my like true authentic shape? I don't know.
I don't know.
I
Yeah.
don't know. And to be okay with not
Yeah.
knowing, and then to be okay with slowly doing the experimentation, because I think sometimes that it's so painful to look at that and you think, okay, well, this is who I am. Well, you might not know because it has taken an 8-year-old years of doing swim, and then they're 12 and they're like, I don't want to do swim anymore, I like basketball, and then actually I really like art, and no, I want to write, and oh, I went to space camp and now I'm interested in this, and then in college they're reading new books, and they're like, in adolescence, developmentally, you were trying on a million different things for size, not like just kind of almost universally, not even speaking culturally specific. Adolescence is a time of just seeing what works for you as you move from like abstract thought to, or concrete thought, to also abstract thought, and holding that, and who am I? These questions are just existentially coming up at the, age where puberty is also biologically happening. So this is already happening naturally. And then superimpose upon that needing to be for different people in order to survive as somebody outside of their cultural, maybe more homogenous or more known entity. So the cultural piece adds an overlay to an already complex array of experimentation behaviors and trying on different ways of dressing and being and talking and music, exposure to that newness until somewhere in adulthood, you might more readily solidify and always leave room for change. So we're talking about a very complex thing. So you as a 35-year-old, 45-year-old looking, seeing the whole, and then thinking immediately you're going to know what you like with a little bit of self-care and just using your brain to be like, I think I'm like this, is so not actually what the process would be if you'd had what you needed in adolescence. It would be years long with lots of experimentation and permission to move into something, and then when you lose interest, to kind of not be involved as much. And that is how we develop that authentic self. And I still have to do that sometimes, of like, give myself the permission to not exactly know, but to be willing to experiment, to not just be limited by not knowing, but then to move along with the knowing. Like, okay, come with me not knowing. Let's see if we like doing this. Let's see if we like doing that. Let's try it out. And seeing it with this experimentation that I kind of didn't get early on, because the external rules that I needed to follow in order to belong and to be accepted were so explicit that it almost like obliterated some of my internal processes and disrupted those internal processes. So not letting myself be with the not knowing and move forward with the not knowing is uncomfortable, but it's precisely the healing of those parts and how we get to an authentic self.
Actually, I'm really curious about what you've just said, because it sounds very similar to what I'm currently experiencing, which is this exploration and feeling that mistakes were not allowed. And also, I don't know how it was within Iranian culture, but I think within Serbian culture, there was something about you kind of need to know things without trying them, because there is a lot of scarcity in terms of resources. So, you kind of need to figure it out because the resources are limited. So I'm wondering, how did you work on or develop that relationships to mistakes, quote unquote, but actually they never are. They're always experiences that we integrate in a certain way and choose to grow through them or not. But I think it took me a lot of time, especially because there was this idea of like all the things going one after each other, finding the good partner, then finding a good job, and then, and you kind of needed to figure that out at 17. Whereas now I'm noticing how it's much more malleable. It's not only that you've figured yourself out and you suddenly know yourself until forever, but you kind of figure one part of yourself within this part of your life, and then you're discovering new and new parts. So the word authenticity is very charged, but I think it comes with the ability to also bend, but according to a little bit more structured inner core. So I'm curious about that.
Oh, you said so many pieces there. And also, I love you saying I can relate to some of this, because I think that all the work that I do showcases that regardless of the important cultural differences, there are so many universalities to this. And I've never talked to another immigrant, daughter of immigrants, bicultural, multicultural being, and not have certain experiences that I say, they're like, you just spoke my experience. even though our lives could be very, very different on the surface. And again, that's why these are historical pieces. It is the scarcity model says you've got one shot. It has to be linear. It has to make sense. There isn't a lot of time to explore. Exploration is inherently risky.
Yeah.
And so scarcity will always come with rigidity, linearity, neatness. All of these things are part of scarcity. And so I think the connection is not maybe the particulars of things within that culture. It's the scarcity mindset that really connects cultures, as well as maybe recognizing that a lot of things that we're struggling with are happening within the collectivistic, individualistic clash. And once you get those pieces, the specifics are really fascinating. And I love talking to Nigerian friends and Egyptian friends and Vietnamese friends and getting all the differences in the culture of this, that, and the other. That's how I'm learning. And that's the stuff I like learning about with other daughters of immigrants and other immigrants. But I think that it is the piece of scarcity. So when you, I think, have the framework that says this is part of a scarcity mindset, only having one shot, not having the resources to buy the materials for painting and then give them up and go out and buy stuff for knitting, or having to choose hobbies that were really necessities. You think my grandmother chose to knit and sew because she loved it? She chose that because she literally had to make clothing for her family. So yeah, in her older years, she knit me this gorgeous blanket I still have, and it's one of my most prized possessions, but it wasn't out of her doing it for self-care and understanding herself. She was doing it from a functional place of needing to serve an adaptive and financial purpose for her family.
Yeah.
So I think when you realize that difference between the scarcity and then maybe abundance or even survival and then safety or security mindsets, it's really kind of interesting. And sometimes I still grapple with it now, but it feels more messy, complicated, and dare I say worse at times when you're doing it this messy way. Linear, okay, it provides some security, some order, like, it's hurting you because you're not developing all these other parts of you. But it's easy because anything that is survival based is going to be more narrow and like direct, because that's what our brains do. I want to just define for someone that might not have that kind of psychological background is like on a normal moment in every day, you have 385 choices. But if a car is coming at you very, very fast, your brain is going to go to one of like 4 total choices, but in that moment, probably like 3 choices, because fawn is not going to be part of them. Can I run away? Flight. Can I fight the car? Fight. Can I freeze and just stay exactly where I am and it will miss me? Or can I do something to ingratiate myself or make things go a little bit smoother and better? Well, the car is not a person. You're not going to talk to them. Car is not an animal. You're not going to like navigate like, eat this, not me. So that one's out. So you've got 3 choices, which in some ways makes it easy because real, not under a survival scarcity mindset, what do I want to eat? There's 3,000 restaurants around me. I could go to the grocery store and make something. So now the options are endless and I'm stuck with like a choice paralysis. So many of us actually prefer some element of that stress response because it limits the choices and makes things really clear. And having done them, you're gonna be able to get past that threat. What is sacrificed, because there is always a cost to that, what is sacrificed is those larger and bigger picture things like fulfillment, self-understanding, self-compassion, identity pieces. Those are the things that are sacrificed. And so often later in life, we have an element of like, I don't really know exactly what I like. And that feels like an existential crisis and very, very big compared to I've got 1 of 3 choices. I'm going to do it this way. So there is an element of sometimes it feels worse because it's bigger. The possibilities are endless. You're not going to get that immediate dopamine rush for having jumped out of the way of the car and then, oh, total relief. I missed that threat. I'm okay now. Like, that's not going to be the same when you try crocheting for the first time. You're not going to like be
And
on a
in
level 9 high.
and in addition, I think it requires a skill set of grieving what cannot be. And I often find that it's difficult for people to whom grieving is still not a skill they've worked through, which I realize for myself, it's been almost like the most important thing to be able to be with. Because then it alleviates the fact that with every new beginning there is a loss,
Yeah.
and I don't need to sit. I can sit enough in that loss so that I can start that new beginning. But if there are accumulated losses, then it's really hard to make those new choices, because there is that almost like compiled grief that is kind of lurking somewhere. And I think that's where therapy comes in. But actually, what I am sitting with also as I'm listening to you is the eloquence and the clarity with which you're like bringing these difficult topics. And I'm wondering what supported you to develop that, because I feel they are speaking from a sense of experience and actually feeling felt and being felt and feeling all these things. So I'm just wondering, what was it, when, when was the moment for you to acknowledge that messiness and then kind of start to speak from it?
Yeah. I mean, a few things that I will acknowledge with me is that what I've realized actually pretty recently, I'd say in the last decade or so, is that me being able to put things into words and then speak them out and deliver a message is actually part of my ancestral and intergenerational like inheritance.
Resource, yeah.
Yeah. It's like I actually belong to a long line of orators, of pastors and preachers who are good at delivering that message on the Sunday, but also counseling people on the Tuesday night at the home. That
Mm,
is actually part of my legacy. My grandfather had it. He moved out of that, like I said, the old Armenian church, began this new Christian movement, very public facing, but also had the meetings in his home where he was counseling people, pastoring people. And so I had this moment about a decade ago where I was like, oh my God, as much as I've tried to do it differently for my family, there's like a certain fate. It makes sense that I do what I do. It makes sense. These are part of my skill sets from my family. Like that makes total sense. And again, there's that feeling of like, I want to be in control and be the choice maker. And then feeling like there are certain parts of it that are
yeah.
like destiny coming together. I had to grapple with like, did I really choose it or did it choose me? And I'm like, both. It's okay for it to be both. It doesn't have to be either I'm choiceless or I have all the choice. Like I have, and I will own this because it's taking me a long time to be okay owning. It's okay to own your strengths. And
Yes.
one of my strengths is being able to take something, deliver it in a message that feels heartfelt, genuine, puts together an eloquence or a different way of putting it together that somebody maybe has heard before, to make it visual, to make it passionate. My dad does that and did that for 30 years, every single week, multiple times a week. That was what he did for a living as a job. And we know that jobs come from deep sense of what your strengths and your talents are as well. And his dad did that. And all his brothers do that. So he comes from this family of being able to do that. My mother's side of the family, one gift that I have was they were healers. My grandfather was a dentist and he had a long, years long, his first job as a teenager was cleaning wounds and helping with like the first line of defense at a hospital. So
Mm.
imagine the like real life apprenticeship that he got doing that. And then he became a dentist who actually developed a method in their village and their town of being able to save teeth without pulling them. And so people would come from all far away. And then my grandmother, excuse me, would be the one where she would create the home environment and welcome people, because if they traveled, they'd have to be there for days on end. So
Mm.
I come from mother's side, healers, people that like welcome people in and have the tools and the skill sets to help them save their teeth, improve their health. And then I come from my dad's side, a long line of using that thinking, oration, her heart and head coming together, delivering it in speech, as well as helping people move through the change process. So it's like some ways owning my strength is also owning that it's not all about me. I come from this. And the more that I've done my healing work on the ancestral piece, the intergenerational trauma piece, working to accept and heal from my childhood wounds that my parents caused, all of those things have actually allowed me to step more and more. It's like, I talk about healing trauma as like an eclipse. You've got the sun, and I think of the sun as the natural gifts and talents that are in that pool. And then the traumas are the things that stand in the way, and you can't see it. And then you start doing like a little bit of healing, and it's like Swiss cheese. Some of it is getting through, but it's still blocked. The more healing you do, you're never going to be fully healed. You'll have that little sliver of moon, but it won't be an eclipse. And then more of the true essence of you, which is inspired by years of the yous that came before you, that can shine through. So very long way of saying, part of me being able to be this way is doing my own work to heal so that I can be the me that I have been put together and resourced to be in this lifetime. If you live in, believe in multiple lives, it's like, just this is the form I'm meant to take in this lifetime. And so part of it is not like I had to create that on my own. Like if you're not naturally an eloquent speaker, maybe you're an amazing writer. Maybe you have a gift for observing. Maybe you have a gift of being able to see where the gaps are in something, take care of them without somebody even knowing you did that. Those are amazing skill sets. And I think sometimes we look at, especially in this like celebrity obsessed individualistic thing of, you have to look and sound and have all the strengths of that person, but that's not your ancestral legacy. You have your own, and you stepping into that. Of course, can you work on finding your voice? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can learn to listen more, stay back more, be in that. Like I can do the flip side of what my strengths are. Those are going to be my growth edges, but really it's to honor that if eloquence is not your gift, that's okay. Maybe your gift is being able to try and fumble through it so that somebody else who doesn't have the eloquence can look at you and say, oh my God, if she could say it, I could try. Or maybe your eloquence comes in, I tried a new recipe. Will you try it? I'm trying something new that I've never done before. Like that, you might have your own giftings, but I do want to point out that I really have had a moment of being able to see that my gifts have actually been more when I've surrendered and recognized that, oh, these things they're there for me. I don't have to try so hard to create them. I have to create other things that I need maybe for a business person, as someone that needs to function in the world. I have other things that I'm not naturally skilled at, but this has been almost like stepping into that and feeling okay receiving those gifts that I've seen previous ancestors be able to do. And that's the way they've been able to support the world in the unique way that they can support the world.
And I'm sitting with the beautiful metaphor and also being the sun and shining the light actually to those pieces of us that are invisible to even ourselves. So it's almost like you are bringing into awareness something that's hasn't had enough light to be seen. So I just it's a lovely metaphor. Thank you for that. Being aware of time, I just want to check. I want to really speak to the difference between collectivist and individualist societies, and how do you see it? You're in a very peculiar space to see that clash or ability to actually have a beautiful combination of the two. So I'm wondering, what you've learned from that.
Yeah. I mean, I think because the personal is always the personal always impacts everything, whether you know it or not. I think I was always on this quest to understand myself. And in trying to understand myself, it makes sense that I was always interested in sociology, anthropology, even before psychology. I didn't really know psychology as a discipline, and I got in through sociology, anthropology, and those studies. But the social sciences and really looking at culture and cultural differences over time, that was really fascinating to me. And then when I kind of moved into the clinical world, I almost felt like for a second I lost that. I was like, oh, this is a different discipline, because I think especially in the West, we know things in these silos. It's like it's very different than holistic ways of thinking. It's very siloed, separate, and fragmented. And then I think that the beauty came when I bridged all of those things together. And it was like, oh, I can work individual, but also be looking at some of these larger scale things that are happening. Individualistic cultures, the aim, the goal is to become an individual. The individual is the highest unit. And you being an individual means you meet most of your own needs. You are self-sufficient. Independence is really valued. Competence is really valued. Very, like, the strength of being an individual is very, very valued. And it comes with all sorts of other things that, are part of that. That's a very general and very kind of specific thing that I'm saying at the same time. Collectivistic, the aim is the social bonds between a group. The group is the unit, not the self. So self is actually defined between people rather than you're there, I'm here. It's like a we. And so it's I, we. And so when you are a child of an immigrant, or for now, again, the child of immigrants, things matters less than, it's harder to say as like a catchy little title, but like I work with those navigating the clashes between individualistic and collectivistic setups and trying to figure out where they lie. Some people are more individual. I am more individualistic than my sister. I'll say that. Even as you can tell, love so many of the collectivistic pieces, I also am more on the individualistic side. I'm married to somebody outside of my culture, Italian American, heavy emphasis on the American piece. I'm very American, right? I go to Europe, I know I'm American. Like I recognize that. It's a part of my culture. And there are things about it that I'm very critical of publicly, but I'm much more than my sister, who's married to another Armenian man, who's much more within that community. And so sometimes, even though my sister is younger than me and born in America, she actually has more collectivistic leanings than I do, having been born in Iran. But from my experiences and personality and preferences, I'm more on this side. And I mean, it's a continuum, so it's not side, but what I mean is closer to a more pure collectivistic place. So I think that it's important to recognize that there is going to be a clash, and you called it like this beautiful harmony. Sometimes it feels like, eating two things together that don't go together and being like, do I like this? It's that messiness, and it's your ability to feel the messiness of it, but not be, I like to say the phrase, to not be distressed by the mess. If you can feel some sense of peace and comfort in being able to tolerate more messiness, that's actually what I mean by safety and movement and healing. Versus when it's too rigid, that's not real life. That's the survival mindset stuff. So it's weird. It's like, I'm going to feel more, which means I'm going to feel bad at times, worse at times, heaviness, conflicted, lots of feelings. The best we're going to have is, yes, you are, but we can become spacious enough to hold them. So it's kind of like, maybe it feels like a tight squeeze, but because you're in a closet. What if you're in a 12-bedroom castle? Now you can invite some friends over, and now you're not having as much of a clash. So it's you creating more of that breathing room to include all the various pieces. It's like, maybe I like this from this piece, but I like that from that piece. And how can I bridge them? But you recognize that there is going to be a clash between collectivism, and then you have to add to the collectivism, individualism kind of piece, the survival and security clash as well. Is that if somebody has lived in the same place for 10 generations and has a lot of generational wealth, and so financially and practically they have all of these people, there's going to be so many different resources that they have that have been then passed on, both not just genetically speaking, but also in how they're parented, the choices that they're given, the frameworks, the access to education and resources that maybe a family that is, again, the immigrant family who gets disrupted, maybe leaves the business, loses the money, has to start fresh, takes 15 steps backwards and never gets to move ahead. Like, that's going to be a very different journey on top of the collectivism, individualism. So my work is also about, I guess what I'm saying is noticing what is collectivism and noticing what is survival that happened in a collectivistic setting. And parsing those two out can be really, really difficult. And you see the challenges and the dialogues and battles and fights and arguments that happen in my comment sections. This is toxic and da-da-da-da. No, this is just part of collectivism. Is like, I don't go in to mediate because one, I'm not the expert in exactly what's what. Is I'm just here to actually create that space for dialogue sometimes of, is this collectivism or is this what happened to collectivism? The context that happened of surviving under colonization, surviving under oppression, and each person having to parse that through and then also having to figure out where are they in that spectrum for themselves in their lives now. And that's not a decision I can make for you and not a decision that anyone can make for me. Like, it's a very individual decision. Even if you're deciding to be more collectivistic, you still have to have some intra psychic deciding around that. So they're inherently very, very, very complex, but I boiled it down to I, we, self, community. And so then you see those clashes, I think, with the children of immigrants or those living, straddling those multiple cultural worlds, of then having to do the hard decision making that if you're purely in this or purely in that, you'll never really have to decide. Everybody is going along with that thing that is majority. When you get the choice, you get the beautiful possibility, but you also get the tremendous responsibility. And I help people feel not alone in that responsibility, to understand and have frameworks for why it feels so heavy, to have support, to know what questions to ask themselves, and to get more skills in their toolkit for navigating the messiness of it. That's literally what I do, boiled down.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, there is part of the collectivism or individualism being choiceful. And I think the thing is about that being choiceful and not being there because that's how you learn to survive. And also, as you were talking, I remembered of Rupi Kaur's Homebody, and remembered that sometimes the wealth is how many rooms in our body we create to hold polarities. And I always, Gestalt therapy has the idea of polarities, and so it's our ability, maturity to me is that ability to hold that polarity, and knowing that you can be both joyful and sad at times. You can be both angry and loving to the same person. And so those are the things that I think therapy, at least for me, is what it is. It's not about making it an either or, but it's really creating space to navigate between them or hold them together, although they might be a completely different thing.
I love that. I always say, if you're asking the question, is it this or this? My answer is yes.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's like, that's what it is. And what you're calling spaciousness to hold the polarities, I always talk about the two components of mental health are flexibility and capacity. That's the spaciousness is the capacity. I have the capacity to hold what seem to be contradictions together, because there is no one pure way of being human. It's actually the multi experience that is the core feature of being able to be human. Multiple awarenesses of time, multiple awarenesses inside of me, but how I seem, so viewpoints, multiple feelings at once, multiple physical sensations at once. It's actually a feature of being human, is multiplicity. And the more spacious you are to hold that multiplicity with flexibility, which means I get to be flexible in choosing, do I want to act out of that angry part, or do I want to act out of the part of me that can see with compassion? Do I want to engage in this thing, or do I not want to engage in it? Do I want to respond to myself in this way, or respond to myself in this new way that is maybe new to my family, not part of my ancestral inheritance, but I'm building through the work of therapy? So flexibility is in response, whether the response is a thought, a feeling, or a behavior. And so I think it's capacity. I get big enough to actually allow, and I'm just going to go full circle of, to allow the fullness of my humanity, which is at the core, going back to, like I said, the baby, the full essence of being human. And so many of the things that were taken from us, if you come from a people that were dominated, oppressed, or had to live in survival rather than abundance. So you going back to hold more, even though at times it feels a lot harder because you're holding more now, that's actually you reclaiming the essence of your humanity. And humanity is multiplicity. but responding with flexibility, which is another way of saying that empowered choice. I am flexible to say, I've got this toolkit. You're never going to get rid of the tools that you were given, but you don't have to keep installing a painting on the wall with a chainsaw just because you got the chainsaw. Like once you have the hammer, the chainsaw doesn't go away. Sometimes you might pick it up and be like, wait a second, I'm not demolishing the home, I'm putting up a new piece of artwork. Why did I grab that chainsaw? Because it's still in your toolkit. It will always be in your toolkit, but you can add and add and add and add, and then have flexibility of choice. That is my 2-word definition to mental health: capacity and flexibility.
Yeah, my supervisor calls it fluid responsiveness.
Yes. Oh, look, I love that. I need to write
Yeah,
that down. Fluid responsiveness,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So, to wrap up, I'm wondering, are there anything that you feel like there is a loose end in this conversation? Because I feel like I would like more conversation on this, but I feel that for this time, I think we covered quite a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But is there something you want to add?
One thing I will tie a loose end on is when you talked about grief and not knowing how to be with your grief, we're not meant to be with our grief
Mm.
individually. Even though I gave you the beautiful individualism and collectivism piece, there is some element and level of collectivism that is actually much more in line with how our biology is designed. So individualism is a little bit more unnatural and outside of the design of humanity,
Mm.
right? And again, we don't have to like, put that down, but there is a certain element that you could be an individual, and we are deeply designed and hardwired for connection. And, you know, animals grieve. Elephants have elaborate mourning processes. So that tells you something, that we are not meant to grieve alone. These conversations for me are us grieving together, being able to put words the way I support. Everybody is going to do differently. At the funeral, some people give speeches, some people comfort by hugging, some people bring food because that's their gifting, but everybody shows up. So maybe I'm providing the words that maybe you've never put together. Maybe I'm providing the framework, but you have a part in this. Is like, can we come to this collective funeral of the parts of us that were developed in this way and trying to reclaim them older in different contexts with all the complexities? Like sometimes grieving is just about showing up in that community together and navigating it together. So we need each other in this process of grief. We're not meant to grieve alone and to be with grief alone. It is collectively. And then going back to some of the tools that we had before. I
Yeah.
think that connection to land and connection to nature is a way that we've been able to deeply grieve, and why my heart breaks for climate change and what our planet is going through, because it's manipulating the seasons, and seasons have been a way that people deal with the end of something and the beginning of something else. Like everything that we feel in the interpersonal and the psychological has a natural counterpart, and nature can be such a powerful way to move through grief in awe, in hope, like all the things that being in nature gives us. Wow, I'm so small, also I belong, also the world is awesome. Like all of that comes when you have an awe-inspired moment in nature. So if you're feeling like the grief feels like too much, it's probably because it's too much to hold alone. Never, in no culture, even in the animal kingdom, does anyone grieve completely alone. And also we need rituals for grief. So maybe you need to create even the smallest little rituals that allow you to then be able to take this grief in small chunks rather than, all in one side. Like it was hard for me to answer some of those questions because I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you put a 20-year process into a 1-minute answer? And why my answers were so long-winded, because it's hard to do. But if it feels like too heavy, you need a community, and maybe listening to your podcast as part of the community, maybe following me and seeing that I'm posting about this and people are jumping in and saying, oh my gosh, you're in my head, you're getting something about me. We are grieving when we have those moments of resonance. Then we're able to put words to it, understand it, know we're not alone, and that helps us to metabolize and digest it. And so I wanted to come back to that piece of grief, and then to take what you would do at something like a funeral, collecting, thinking about the positive things, celebrating that life, giving yourself permission to feel those things can be brought in no matter what you're grieving. And so we can use those things that we know from our culture. And again, if you look at pure Western culture, if you pass a certain time frame, then it's complicated grief and it's a diagnosable
Oh my
disorder.
God. Yes. Yes, I've
Rather than
heard that.
in
Yeah.
pure Armenian culture, you're supposed to wear black for the first year. You're supposed to
Here,
have
the
not
same in
have
Serbia.
party, right? So, you're like that every single person then would be diagnosed with like
Yeah.
complicated bereavement. And so you just even look at the ridiculousness of that and how so much of this has been superimposed onto our cultures. And sometimes we have to like shrug off that and reconnect to the essential wisdom. I think maybe you don't have to wear black for the full year. It's you're giving yourself a year of transition to know this is a big thing you just went through. It's okay to not be over it in 2.5 weeks when you have to get back to your 9 to 5 job. Like, it's okay to have an elongated period where you need people coming in and out and supporting you and practically loving on you by bringing food or being there to provide childcare or whatever it might be. So it is going back to some of these things that our cultures know
Yeah.
and reclaiming them, even as we might be going back to in 2 weeks and might be doing some of these things as part of the modernized kind of globalized world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting with that because I grew up where we sang songs around the table. And I know how much even those songs are something that I now remember as I'm going through grief. And yeah, I always felt I'm really feel really flat, not flat or privileged, to be coming from a culture where those literals were still quite alive, so that I don't feel that stigmatization. But I know when I work with clients in the Western world, I can see like, oh, I should be past this. This should have been done by now. And then it becomes a self-judgment, whereas we know that these processes are long and take time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some ways are atemporal.
Yeah.
You might have someone cry 20 years after a loved one that they've lost, and that would be okay in Serbian or Armenian culture. But
Yes.
maybe a sign of you're not moving on, you're stuck in the past in a Western viewpoint. And so,
Yeah.
even just going full circle to the beginning, my sharing of the poem is like a reclaiming of a cultural, you sit down and you do that.
Yeah.
And I remember being told one of the, I don't remember Iran, but I have been told stories, is that when we would have a family party, I'd stand up on a little chair and I would say poetry or sing a song or do something that was like an offering. So like I've done that. That's one way. And then what? Everyone sits around and listens, and does
It
that. And
also there is it's not as performative as we see it here. It's part of
yeah,
a ritual. And there is one thing where I always, because I'm a scientist, and I always feel like science leads me to a place where I know what is that things that we can kind of control. But then therapy takes me from there on, which is to work with the things that we know we cannot change. And I think this is something that I feel like now is like in the Western world, I'm still feeling sitting with how therapy is not as common. It's in pockets, but it's not that normalized, let's say. So I feel like that's where I've kind of grown in my journey, that there is a point where we reach as humans, that there are things that require grieving, and there are things that cannot be changed, we have no control over, and require the messiness and the surrender. So thank you for bringing that. Yeah.
yeah. And I love that you made the differentiation between performative versus it's a sharing. And if you sing a song, everybody sings, and not everybody has a great voice, but everybody
Yeah.
sings because you're not singing to perform, you're singing to cathart, to connect, to be a part of something. You're singing because that's what people do in the phase of life, in the face of what can't be understood and must just be felt. So those are all other forms. And when we bring those forms into our lives, we actually have far more tools than sometimes we think we have for being able to deal with the messiness. And it gives me comfort that people have been dealing with the things I'm dealing with in some way, shape, and form for all of existence. So
Yes.
I have way more tools than my tiny little world tells me. And part of the hope of my work is just to expand that a little bit so people can access more and more tools than maybe they've even ever recognized word tools for them.
And what do you think, like, to wrap up, what's the gift that you really like to leave your clients with? As in, I know not a physical gift and it's not part of therapy, but is there anything that, from working with you, you would like people to carry with them?
The number one thing I think I love when people feel, whether it's a coaching client, a therapy client, or just a person connecting with me, a person listening to this podcast, is I will know that I have done my work if you leave feeling a little bit more empowered.
Mm,
So just you feeling better about you.
mm,
That's my goal, is not for you feeling better about me. Because I think that's therapy, is like, I'm the expert and I don't want you to leave and be like, oh, Pauline is so blah, blah, blah. I want to be like, okay, that's her gift. I maybe have a gift that I haven't discovered yet or haven't called a gift, like one small thing, or maybe I'm okay. I know it's been years, and of course it would be years me figuring this out. This is pretty complex. She spent all these years and is a professional and is still finding it complex in her own personal life. So you feeling empowered to feel, you feeling empowered to feel that messiness, like to feel a little bit more, I'm okay, I've got gifts, I'm a person worthy of love, like some element of a reconnect, which is the opposite of, I think, a lot of Western psychology, is like the way that I get in is by making you feel bad. So then you feel like you need what I have to offer you. That's like a helping format. Whereas a service format is me just leaning in and being fully me and fully messy me and showing that to you, not in the performative, but in the sharing, connected way, is going to make you feel a little bit more like you. And that empowerment is not because I'm above, but because I am with and we go together. So if someone could feel a sense of empowerment, a sense of confidence, a sense of new insight, and feel better about themselves, even if they're in a more difficult situation or feeling more difficult feelings, I think I will have done my job. Feel okay, empowered enough to face a difficult question, not answer it, just face it in a way that they haven't faced before. That would mean I'm not giving to you from a hierarchical, but I am sharing. And in sharing it, I've actually invited you into a place that you have within you, which is, I wish I had it with me, but there's the prayer of the medicine woman, which is like, I'm not going to
it's
fix
on
you.
my
Yeah.
website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to fix you. I'm here to, be with you so you can recognize you don't need fixing. You're amazing. Is like, that's what I want people to get from my work, is to never feel badly about themselves, even if they're looking at a pattern of like, oh my gosh, that's a pattern I'm contributing to, or, oh my gosh, I add to white supremacy. I'm not breaking that and dismantling that. And I'm gaining the privilege from it. And that's painful to acknowledge. But I always hope you feel somewhat more empowered as a result of us connecting with one another, just by me showing up and being fully me. And that would be the greatest gift to, I think, me. So it's even like I'm moving in like what would be a great gift to me, rather than like something I have to give of me to you, like
Yeah.
to fix you or like take this, is like, you're going to discover that gift within yourself, and that will be a gift to me. And that's kind of how we just move forward. So I think that's the empowerment piece, is what comes up for me in terms of like what I hope I give people, is like some element of like, I'm okay. Maybe I'm better than okay. I've got things to offer. I'm worthy. It's not always okay, but I can figure this out. I'm strong, like whatever it might be that you need to figure out about you.
Can I ask one more question? Because
Sure.
this answer now, really, but I remember that on your Instagram page, and I think you eloquently really speaks about this, about noticing our own places of privilege and supremacy. And I don't want to miss that, because I think it's really important, because it involves not shaming people into change, but really inviting them to look at how they contribute to a problem. And I would like to hear you speaking more to that, because I think you have, again, being white passing, but still different culturally and ethnically. and racially, basically really puts you in a very unique position to speak of that.
Yeah, my cultural spyness, right?
Yes,
Being
exactly.
able to navigate
Exactly.
all this. And I think way back when, I think I was going to share, like, I remember this one experience of somebody saying something to me about Middle Easterns or Iranians or Armenians or something, and having no sense that I was of that culture,
Yeah.
and me nodding and agreeing and laughing along, rather than saying, that's really incredibly offensive and you're offending me personally. You're talking about my people. And that was a moment where I had to recognize moving through the guilt, right? Rather than like, ooh, I'm a cultural spy. She never even knew. Haha, the joke's on her. To me, being like, that was deeply painful. And as much as I
Yeah.
can shapeshift, what a painful place to be in, because I get to see the truth of what's in people's hearts when they don't think that I am somebody that is different, somebody that is other. And I think that we really do have to, when we think about how to create change, you have to have enough support in order to grow and learn. Learning is always done within a relational context. We don't have an a relational learning that happens in the world. As humans, we learn everything in relationship, which is kind of wild to wrap your head around. You don't just pick up a book, you're having a relationship with the writer of that book. Through the relationship, you are understanding what their ideas are. So it does matter, right? You as a scientist, very easy to say, oh, science is you don't think the scientists have biases? You don't think the scientists are people that are part of it? Everything is relational. Everything. That's part of the fragmentation that is not just individualism, but is white supremacy. It's different to say individualism versus white supremacy, patriarchy. These are systems of oppression and control that try to have certain resources only be granted to some at the very cost of the other. That's not individualism. That is hyper individualism that is then put into a system of oppression. And so understanding that these are systems that benefit some at the cost of others and deny humanity to some, and the resources only to a select few based on whatever it might be, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, and all of these things are interlaid and overlapping because obviously we have different parts of our identity. So how do you learn from relationship? So the relationship has to feel safe enough. People have to feel a sense of safety so the defenses are down so that they can be able to take in healthy guilt and even, I will say, a healthy level of shame. Healthy shame is I did not act in the best that I know I can act. Not just I did something wrong, but I wasn't who I wanted to be. That is healthy shame. Toxic shame is I'm such a POS. Nothing I do matters. I'm so horrible that I failed as a human. I might as well get the small temporary satisfaction of being mean to other people and seeing that I have power by hurting them. That is toxic shame. Or I will never touch this again. Or I will shut this down and pretend and perform like I am so a part of the movement, whatever the movement may be. So I think part of this is recognizing we need to have enough safety and the relational safety in order to be able to look at the ways in which we perpetrate these systems. We continue and these systems. The more privileges you get from that system, the more you're going to be drinking the Kool-Aid, and then it's going to be harder for you to be against that system. I benefit from white supremacy. I benefit from ableism because I'm able-bodied. So I don't have to think to myself how to navigate the world in a wheelchair. I don't have to think about that. That is not part of it. So if I don't do a diligent job, I will forget about that. I have to remind myself that, but I have to remind myself that within the context that I am a good person. And to make good on that, I'm a good person. It can't be just in words. A good person, what is a good person? A good person is when they are faced with their mistakes, when they get new information, they take that and they put it into action. I can't just say, oh, poor people in wheelchairs navigating the world. I then have to move past that to say, can I advocate for another entrance for my building, which is not ADA? I started telehealth way before COVID happened because I wanted, my building was not ADA, which is, for those outside of the American context, is the American Disabilities Act, which means that your building has to be accessible to people with all different ability levels. I did the telehealth piece so that people that were new moms that couldn't go up the stairs, people that were wheelchair bound, still had to have access or could have access to the therapeutic care that I was providing. And so all of that to say is you have to have the strength of feeling like you're a good person, but that comes in actually showing up as that good person with action. It's not enough to just say it, feel it. That's like a performative empathy. Oh, poor fill in the person who doesn't have the privilege that maybe you have. That's not going to change a system. The system changes is when people that get those goodies actually give up the goodies and be able to give, to think of Robin Hood.
Yeah.
Steals from the poor, gives to the rich, so there can be more financial equity. You have to think in terms of equity. And I do that consulting with businesses and companies and organizations. How do we do the equity in not just namesake, but in action? And I have to do that in my own life. If I'm looking at a privilege that I've gotten, something I didn't know, a language piece that I've used that was offensive, okay, let me learn from that. And in order to learn from that, I have to have enough safety within the relationship with myself and knowing who I am, as well as having people that can support me and don't see me as just my mistake, but see me as growing. And then I have to actually be accountable, because a lot of people think self-compassion is self-luxury and leaving yourself off the hook. No, self-compassion actually leads to more accountability. Because I love my children, I have compassion. I don't let them candy for dinner every night. So self-compassion or compassion is not luxury or indulgence. It's actually the opposite. I love you, so I want the best for you, which sometimes means holding your feet to that fire and to the accountability of you learning and growing and continuing to be accountable, even when it's hard. So we have to do that. And those with more privilege, like myself, have to do the work. And I often get, which I totally can respect, you're white passing, and I feel so weird hearing these things from you. You don't live in a black body. You don't live in a brown body. You don't live in a disabled body. You don't live in all these other bodies. Who are you to talk about that? I absolutely can understand where that person is coming from. And hearing it from me is not the person they need to follow, need to be in contact with. But I will continue saying it because it is my way, because who I can reach are other white passing people with privileges who can see themselves in me, who I am speaking to, who need to do better with action because of the privileges they're getting. So that's why I keep doing the work I'm doing, because the people that are meant to find me hopefully will and will do that work.
And I think it's really important. I've recently had to give a speech where I kind of I've wanted to advocate for people who don't have voices. And I was in a space where I wasn't sure how homophobic the environment is. And I remember how afraid I was to say what I had to say. And then I thought, imagine this is a second layer. Imagine how is it for the person who this is not a choice. For me, it can still be a choice. I can still choose not to say it. I have my white passing looks can still hide things. So there is a choicefulness in how I look and how I am, versus for people who don't have that choice and have to face closed doors and shutting their voices down every single day. So that's where I realized myself, why is it important to speak? And actually, why is it so difficult for those people to really bring themselves and the anger they hold? Because already being at that space, I could feel the fear, the discomfort, the not knowing how I will be received and whether I will be ostracized for something that matters to me. And so these are all the things that are not easy, but I'm really glad that you're speaking to them.
And then when you realize that's not just an individual experience, you just bumped up against this invisible system that holds people powerfully in a range of what is allowed, acceptable, legitimized, seen as normal or okay. Wow. Those are those moments where you are like, this is a structure and a system. This isn't just an individual to individual thing, which a lot of people mistake interpersonal and institutional or systemic and structural forms of oppression. White supremacy is a structural form of oppression. Patriarchy is a structural form of oppression. And the ways that we change these systems are to change the laws and the policies. Women couldn't hold land one day, couldn't own this, couldn't do that, couldn't do that. You'd think we were living in old times, because women can still not do a lot of things with their own bodies or with property here in America today in 2024. But still, you change the laws, but you also have to work on the change that happens internally. An amazing book that I love is The New Jim Crow, talking about how the abolition of a lot of the segregation laws and other anti-Black laws in America didn't do anything to change people's hearts. It just drove those things deeper inward into our psyches. And just like the eclipse piece, doing your own work around your own internalized white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, ableism, xenophobia, all of those pieces, that's going to be a part of healing. Because me feeling like, yes, I'm a cultural spy was actually contingent upon me hating my otherness. And me embracing my otherness has been a part of my healing, which brings an anger at the systems that created that twisting. And then the accountability to be a part of untwisting that for future generations. And not because we'll be successful, there's no guarantees there, but because I cannot be silent. I cannot betray myself in that way by not saying these pieces. And that's why I speak very openly about Palestine, about Iran, about Armenia, about trans rights, about gay rights. These are things I will never stop speaking out about, because that is me doing that continued healing of unlearning some of what was taken in, even if I benefited from it. And I have actually more of a responsibility because I benefited from it. So think of like, if you've been given all of these tools and resources, then you've got more at your disposal. And so you've got to use them. And I see my work as something that I didn't always want to do, but it feels like a calling. Like, no, I've got to do this. This is my duty. And I think duty can have such a negative connotation to it because we want to just be unencumbered. This is my duty. It is my duty. It is my responsibility. And I do believe we have a responsibility to each other. It's part of that human design of connecting. And part of these warped systems is if it doesn't impact me, it doesn't matter, rather than everything impacts me and everything matters. So where can I bring my voice? And where can I open the door as the cultural spy and let in somebody else's voice? I never, ever say yes to a speaking engagement that puts me as the expert of a community I am not a part of. So somebody wanted something for Black mental health. And I said, do you have other Black people you're asking to do that? I'm not Black. Why would I come speak at this event? So I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to say yes to that. There are so many other voices from that community. So it's very important not to speak over communities, but to use your voice. And I will mess up. And sometimes I'll speak for, and then someone will message me and be like, that doesn't speak to me. And how dare you? And I'm like, oh, I'm a good person, but I'm learning and I got to learn, do better. And so I have to have those internal processes, not to go to that toxic shame, have the healthy shame, have the healthy guilt, help it mobilize me to do better, do better, do better, do better. But I will put my foot in my mouth, and being afraid of going back to the making a mistake, knowing that's part of the survival piece, not when you have my son's not up at 2 a.m. wondering if he can make a mistake. I was as a teenager, like, oh my God, I have to get straight A's. My son is not feeling that because he's growing up in a very different context. So, all of that is connected, and I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and definitely. And what I'm sitting with is that the compassion piece while still doing the activism, because Linda Tai speaks always about trauma is a sprint and activism is a marathon over many generations. So there is that piece that once you get aware of all the things that you didn't do and you didn't give voice to, there is that piece of like, I want to do it more, but then it burns us out. So there is that really important element of compassion while still being willing to engage and do the work that's necessary to be done. So thank you.
Yeah. And if you are actually doing it in the sprint, it's often because it makes you feel so uncomfortable that you didn't do it, that you want to do it to be good again. You get rid of that. I am good and I can always act gooder. It's like you're not fixing something, because then that's activism that's actually coming from a toxic shame place. Not activism that's coming from a deep reverence for yourself and the other and your humanity, which means honoring the full humanity of the other, whatever body, whatever structure, whatever culture, whatever person that person's put together, right? So it's going back to the full humanity of it is an essential wholeness and essential goodness of all of us, including ourselves, rather than often when people want to throw themselves in full force into activism and then burn out, is because it feels so uncomfortable when I start seeing these things and the fact that so many years I didn't do something and I was part of the problem. You have to actually be with it. And then all the things that we talked about with grief, witnessing, being with others, and recognizing, oh, okay, now I can do better. And taking it slowly is actually a way to do it that isn't about you, but is about truly being able to heal from the depths so that you can offer from a place of not, I'm a helper, but I am with you, alongside you in a different way, but human just like you are. And we're each going to have those revelations according to different things, depending on our identities. Like, for instance, I don't have an accent from you, even though you're white passing, someone hears you speak, they have all sorts of other things that they plug in. So even something as small as an accent is not small at all in terms of how it influences you.
Yeah.
And it's about really being able to kind of parse all of those things out while not erasing that we both, you and I, benefit from white supremacy. And so there's all those pieces of complexity to some of this. And so, yeah, we've got to slow down. It is the marathon piece. And I love what I heard at a talk way back when about not looking at the result, but looking at the responsibility. Like, I'm going to do good on my responsibility, not do what I need to do so I see the result. Like, this is a much longer piece. It's not about what's the result and I need that in order to keep me motivated. It's the, what's my responsibility to my own awareness, to my own value system, to my own integrity, as well as to the me that is not me but is me, just the other.
And this
Like,
come back to the piece of service,
yeah.
of of then being in service of something that's greater.
Yes.
Yeah.
And not it's not helping, it's service. It's not, oh, poor you, I feel sorry for you. It's, oh my goodness, you are just like me, but you're not being treated as so. We all deserve that. And in owning that and leaning into that insight, you're actually giving me a gift of reconnecting to the full humanity in me, because white supremacy, every single one of these systems of oppression hurt everyone.
Yeah.
Patriarchy hurts men. Just because it gives them privilege doesn't mean it doesn't hurt men. Men are suffering loneliness. They're dying from suicide. They are, suffering from trauma silently. They are just under crippling levels of mental health struggles without being able to have the voice for saying that, because patriarchy operates with men being the can do, not feeling fully self sufficient, just based on gender differences. And so patriarchy, while it grants men a tremendous amount of privilege, also hurts them. So when you realize, regardless of whether you gain from a system or are oppressed by a system, everybody hurts from the system at some level, like the aha is going to come in the oneness, even as you recognize the individual differences and use the resources and strengths you have in service to something, again, larger than yourself, which I think is us, again, reclaiming the essentialness of our humanity. Humanity has always been about each person doing some part for the collective whole. It's kind of how we evolved to be where we are now. We can't lose that, because we won't be able to progress without it to some place that anybody would want to live.
And I like that we are ending on the place we started, which is embracing uh, our humanity and loving our broken hearts together.
Love that. Thank you, Alex. I feel like I could
Thank
speak
you.
to you for just hours and hours and hours in terms of the ways all of these things go in together. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate for those who dropped in on this conversation, left, came back, took it all in one bite, however you absorb it. I hope it gives you exactly what you're needing in this exact moment and gives you some sense of that empowerment just by listening, so that you can move forward in a way that feels more supported and more encouraged. And that would be such a gift. So please let us know if that happens to you. I always love hearing actual stories, and always benefit from every single person who reaches out and says, I just wanted you to know that you helped me through this, or I recognize this about myself. Always amazing. I don't do it for that, but it is such nice to just bake that in. And so if this podcast spoke to you, yeah, let Alex know, because this is, I think, what keeps her doing the gifts that she has to offer in terms of service to the world.
Yeah, I really I echo that, and I do really want to hear back, because what is always important for me is to to feel the connectedness. And because I am a being of dialogue, which you can kind of see here, I think dialogue is important to me, and I really strive to start dialogues. So feel free to dialogue with both of us. Thank you.
Thank you.